r/askReddit. What do you think is the creepiest, most disturbing unsolved mystery ever? Honestly, the Cape intruder isn't disturbing, just weird as hell. During the night in Cape, Maine in like 2005, people who kept their doors unlocked would wake up to find a man staring at them, and he would quickly flee. No people were ever injured and nothing was ever stolen. They just watched people sleep, apparently. That guy could be someone in this Reddit post reading about himself and posting and shit. I guess we'll never know. After I graduated high school, I traveled around England for 2 months. I had just turned 18, if I got my math right. Stayed in a hostel in Liverpool for a night, slept in a room with 2 bunk beds. I slept on the bottom bunk of one of the beds. Middle of the night, I half wake up to a man watching me sleep and having his face maybe little more than a foot from mine. I kept my eyes closed enough that you'd think I was still asleep and stayed half awake till he resigned to his own bed. I woke up early the next morning and took the first coach to Manchester. That was enough Liverpool for me. A foot away from your face? God damn, I would have screamed or shit myself if I woke up to that. Good on you for managing to remain collected enough to stay still and asleep. When I was 19, due to having unstable finances, living situation when I left college, I had no choice but to move in with a random guy who was renting a room in his apartment. Also, for context, I am a woman. At the time, he seemed okay. Plus I was desperate because of the circumstances, so I moved in. My room didn't have a lock on the door. I was a pretty naive teenager, so while I was slightly concerned about that, I felt like I was being overdramatic and brushed it off. Anyway, I am typically a heavy sleeper. But one night, I happened to wake up to this guy standing over my bed, just staring there. I freaked out, of course, because it was creepy as hell, and he tried to lie and say he thought I called for him. WTF. I have zero idea how long he had been doing that. I moved out as soon as I could after, but whenever I think back to that event, I have always felt extremely violated and creeped out whenever I think about it. The Cleveland torso murderer. When my grandparents were my age, there was a serial killer who chopped off the heads and appendages of 12 to 20 people and left their torsos for people to find. The famous detective Elliot Ness was on the case, and the killer taunted him by leaving 2 torsos within full view of his office. The killer was never identified, nor were the majority of the victims. My grandpa wrote a book on this case. The killer will never be identified, and the victims especially. The victims seem to be mostly homeless, prostitutes, etc. They weren't exactly traceable people. The killer was surgical, like literally surgical in the cuts. Nobody will ever know who did it, but Elliot Ness was tortured with solving the case. Though, not as much as the victims were undoubtedly tortured, sadly. It'll remain an unsolved serial killer case. It's very interesting. Ness narrowed down a suspect, interrogated him secretly in a hotel room for a couple of days. He was a surgeon, who was the nephew of a prominent politician of Cleveland at the time. Something Sweeney, I think. Forgot the name now. I forget the dude's name, but the running theory for a long time was that the guy you're talking about was the killer. That theory was at least partially debunked sometime in the last 5 to 10 years. New evidence came out proving that the guy we're talking about couldn't have committed all of the murders that are generally attributed to the torso killer. Of the 4 or 5 people still living that can be considered experts on this case, one of them believes that there were 2 serial killers active in the same area at the same time, the guy we are talking about and an unknown second killer. Imagine if one of the torsos was the original serial killer. The Axeman of New Orleans. Guy was murdering people but wrote a letter that he wouldn't kill anyone who played jazz in their home. Never caught. Someone said that the police could have all hid in one house not playing jazz music and catch him that way. Holy shit, I never thought of that. I remember reading about that from Aaron Mank's lore. Funniest part was, he kept his promise. That night, jazz emanated from every house, and nobody was killed by him again. I know it's basic, but Black Dahlia is that one case that gives me the creeps for everyone who doesn't know, which I think the majority knows of this case. Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, was found cut in half in Los Angeles, California in 1947. Most of her blood was drained out of her body. The woman who found her body thought she was a mannequin, that's how pale she was. She was cut with surgical precision, no organs harmed. Her face was also cut from mouth to ears, making a permanent creepy smile on her face. No blood on the ground, so the body was definitely moved to the place it was found at. After she was found, I think 9 to 10 days after, an envelope was sent to the examiner with cut and pasted letters saying something in the lines of, "Here is Dahlia's belongings." The envelope contained Elizabeth's security card, birth certificate, photographs, etc., all cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. I think in the March of the same year the murderer committed suicide, leaving a note confessing to the murder and saying stuff like, "I have waited for the police to come find me. I am too much of a coward to come turn myself in. This is the best way out for me." His clothes were found, and this note probably had fingerprints on it, yet no one could identify the killer, and the killer is still unidentified to this day. This case always brings me the chills because he has to be a trained professional to make those cuts, and he has to be so sick to even think about doing that. He said he killed himself, but can we be even sure? No body was found. The Hinterkaifeck murders always freaked me out. I've read quite a bit about it, and it sounds like it was probably a neighbor. But the creepy part is that the killer was probably living, hiding out in the attic for multiple days beforehand. I read about this for the first time when I went on a multi-night hiking trip. I stayed in cabins. The first night, there was a loft above where we were sleeping. I stared at it all night. Holy hell, that was a journey. I went in for creepy murder. Ended up getting creepy incest in a dude named Adolf Gump. Which gives me an idea for a gritty sequel to a beloved movie. Also obsessed with this one. Apparently local authorities have a pretty good idea of who did it, but they refuse to release it. 1. To spare the reputation of living descendants, and 2. Because no real justice can be done at this point. What happened to Pedro Lopez? He is one of the most prolific serial killers in history, and claims to have murdered over 350 women and girls. Since his release in 1998, his whereabouts are currently unknown. They released him? There are a lot of countries with maximum sentences. No life without parole option exists in their legal system, regardless of how heinous the crimes. That's just stupid. I'm all for prison reform, but there's clearly some people who are so dangerous they should never be released back into society, ever. I think the Colombian government killed him, tbh. Probably not even the government. Probably just some Colombian cop or cops who decided to take matters into their own hands. Drug war violence was still really bad at that time, not to mention the FARC insurgency and the AUC massacres, so extrajudicial killings happened all the time. If some cops decided to go vigilante on him and then dispose of his body, then it probably wouldn't have been the first, third, or 12th time it happened that year. Doesn't even have to be the cops. I don't know about Colombia, but in Argentina there have been more than a few cases of unofficial execution, where they publicly announce that such and such notorious criminal is being released from such and such prison on such and such date, send them out of the prison gates alone on release day with a handshake and a "see y'all later," and ignore the crowd of angry vigilantes carrying clubs and knives waiting to greet them. Then their disappearance is never investigated and they're classified as fugitives. This guy was a globally infamous child-raping serial killer with 300+ possible victims. If they announced his location within 10 miles, he was probably murdered by a mob the next day. The death of Rebecca Zahau has stuck with me. Zahau's nude body was found hanging from a balcony, with her wrists and ankles bound and hands behind her back. Her death was ruled a suicide. As if that wasn't strange enough, 2 days prior to her death, the 6-year-old son of her boyfriend fell down a staircase and died. His death was ruled an accident. There's a lot to read about this case, and I highly recommend it if you're into true crime. I remember watching a documentary on this one. They focused so much on whether it would be possible to bind her wrists behind her back and not enough on who TF commits suicide like that. Ah yes, this person decapitated themselves and cut their body into several pieces which they disposed of in 10 different locations. Police language for, "we just can't be asked." I can't remember his name. But there was a case of a college-age young man, Brian I think is his first name, who was reported missing after a night out. There's security camera footage of him entering a bar, but absolutely no footage of him leaving. Like he went into the bar and just flat out dropped off the face of the earth. The last I knew, he's never been found and nobody knows what happened to him. ETA, since it keeps coming up, the bar was on a 2nd floor at that time with only one public entrance, exit. The police extensively reviewed all the footage. Everyone, except for Brian, who was at the bar that night, was seen leaving on the cameras. Brian Schaefer. And with the bar now closed and torn down, it's going to be difficult to ever solve this one. Is that the one where they think he could have fallen into a nearby river and been swept away? There's a similar one in the UK. A guy called Corey McKeague. After going out drinking with friends, he became separated. There's CCTV of him walking into a dead end which had several large wheelie bins, dumpsters. It's thought he fell asleep in one of the dumpsters and was accidentally lifted into the bin lorry. Despite a huge search of landfill and tracing his mobile, his body has not been found, and he is now presumed dead. I'm trying to comprehend drinking enough to hop into a trash can and sleep in it. I read somewhere that it was a fairly common thing for him to do. I go to Ohio State. The gossip theory is that he fell out of an unsecure door in the bar. You see, the first location of Ugly Tuna, the bar, was on a second-story building. This building was undergoing construction. The main doors had cameras, the fake construction doors did not. He must have fell out of a second-story construction door. There was a cover-up, because the family would have sued for tons of money. That's the whispered theory. There's no footage because there is footage of the real doors that led to flooring, and no footage of the fake construction doors led to a 2-story drop-off of a construction site. I've explained it poorly, but I hope there's some clarity. This is what I had read somewhere too. The original theory of the bar being monitored from all angles wasn't true but assisted the allure of this missing case. Technically not unsolved since everyone can guess what happened to her, but it's one of the creepiest emo. Alissa Turney was a teenager who disappeared in 2001. Her stepfather, Michael Turney, was obsessed with her. He stalked her at work, put cameras in the vents to spy on her and made her sign contracts to say he never molested her. Michael picked her school early on May 17, 2001, and she's never been seen since. Her half-sister, Sarah Turney, has an amazing podcast called Voices for Justice which explains the case in detail, and because of her Michael was arrested in August 2020. I don't know about you, but I've never felt the urge to preemptively warn that someone was lying about something they'd claim I had done unless I had actually done it. Sarah Turney is a hero. Her dedication to her sister reminds me of Kelsey German, who lost her sister Libby, who was murdered in Indiana in 2017 with Libby's friend Abby. I hope Kelsey gets to see her sister's murderer arrested as well. I'd like to see the bastard that killed Abigail and Liberty get what he deserves. Friends with the family, and they confirmed they were assaulted. Holy shit, I remember this. They got a video on one of the girls' phones of the dude that did it as he was following them. That video is bone-chilling. I follow a couple subs on this case and check in every now and then to see if they've finally caught the guy. I just couldn't comprehend that they literally had this guy on video, along with his voice, and still nothing. A pic of the suspect and his voice, and I can't believe no arrest. If the girls were assaulted, where is the DNA? Familial DNA can be run. Seems like that whole investigation has been screwed up. I'm sorry, but there's no confirmation the girls were sexually assaulted in a manner that would leave DNA. Law enforcement has been cagey when discussing DNA but have stated they have it, or some. It's hard to say as it's been 5 years and there's been no genealogical match that the public knows of, so folks guess it may be a partial DNA sample. I'd be wary of anyone confirming details on Reddit about this case as rumors and speculation run rampant. There was recently a search warrant for the property on which their bodies were found that included the most detail about the crime scene to the public to date, but not a single word in that about assault. Just that a redacted weapon caused their deaths. I remember watching the Unsolved Mysteries episode about a person in 1977 who would send creepy anonymous letters to random folks in a small town. Actually threatening ones, too. The sender started by mailing up a woman and telling her, if I remember right, that they knew she was cheating on her husband with a superintendent, something she vehemently denied. Then they threatened her husband by saying he'd be in danger if he did not stop the affair. The couple decided to take it upon themselves to hunt the sender down. That ended with the husband dead in his crashed pickup truck. The sender kicked the wife while she was down by leaving threatening signs along her bus route, at least one of which had an actual booby trap on it. They found and arrested a suspect, but it's still unknown today if he's the actual sender. He denies it. The idea that somebody has been quietly studying your life just so they could begin to anonymously blackmail you, or make up a rumor to blackmail you with, is pretty damn scary. I forget how I know this, too many true crime docs, but it is very likely that the letters were written from a property near the main victim's house, which was occupied by a troubled couple in the process of separating due to some serious mental, emotional issues. It seems likely that the main letter writer was the wife, who was very unstable and also had the best view into neighbors' yards to spy on them. She covered her tracks by using her husband's old possessions to do her mischief, so the forensic evidence would appear to lead to him. I am a proponent of this theory because if you look at the wording and tone of the letters, they don't really sound like they were written by a typical male stalker. There isn't really any obsession over the victim, it's just gossipy and bullying. Also, on a more positive note, though the district employee and the superintendent were innocent of having an affair, during the process of investigating the rumors about them, they realized they got along quite well and ended up getting together later in their lives and were very happy. So maybe the insane letter writer was picking up on some real romantic potential. The Setagaya family murder. Late on the night of December 30, 2000 in Setagaya, Tokyo, a man broke into the house of a family of 4, strangled the son in his bed, stabbed the father, and brutally killed the mother and daughter. The killer then spent hours in the house eating their food, using their toilet, and going through their paperwork like he owned the place, and eventually left, never to be found since. Frick, I live a 20-minute train ride from there. This is fascinating and terrifying. It's likely that the killer was an American serviceman that was based out of Yokosuka. How so? Why was this serviceman suspected? This case made me curious. The killer left a hip bag which had some sand in it. The sand was determined to be from near Edwards Air Force Base in California. Boy in the Box, 1957, Philadelphia. Warning. Graphic details. This story just makes me so sad and sticks out to me as a true crime junkie, especially with the recent case of a child being found in a Las Vegas suitcase that is still under investigation. Basically, a young boy whose age was estimated to be 3 to 7 years old was found in a box naked and mutilated on the side of a road in Philadelphia. It was strange because the boy appeared to have been very malnourished, but was recently groomed, haircut, fingernails all trimmed. He was covered in scars, some surgical, and many bruises. His bones were broken to fit into this box. Cause of death determined to be blunt force trauma. How anyone could do something like this is just foul and disturbing to say the very least. The worst part is, it's just a big mystery, almost nothing to go off of. There wasn't anyone matching his description reported missing. There wasn't any record of this kid, his pure existence was a mystery. Nothing came of the case, even all these years later. There were some leads, but they didn't result to much, despite heavy media coverage and a search to find who this boy was. What happened to him, and who did this? What were the surgical scars for? Why the box? Why was he kept malnourished, but well-groomed? 1957 was a long time ago, but maybe genetic genealogy could solve the mystery of who he was. Unless he was born in secret, there must at least be a hospital record of his birth. If investigators can narrow down through enough third cousin matches what possible families he could have belonged to, it seems like they should be able to look at birth and census records and find a likely match. Apparently, there have been some developments of some kind on this case recently. I'm hoping maybe it's forensic genealogy and they'll be able to identify him that way. There's a company called Othram Labs that does forensic genealogy and has been solving cold case unidentified body mysteries left and right. I wonder if this case is on their radar at all. What happened to the Eilean Moor lighthouse keepers? Most likely they were swept out to sea by violent waves, but no storms were reported on the dates they went missing, and if there were, why would they leave the safety of their lighthouse? It was most likely a rogue wave, which would explain the lack of severe weather in the area that day. Rogue waves, as the name suggests, are seemingly random oceanic events unconnected to traditional sea storms. The first rogue wave wasn't even detected until 1995. Prior to that, rogue waves were thought to be scientifically impossible and just tall tales from sailors. A toolbox was also missing when they searched the premises. Keepers were fined about a day's wage for missing equipment, so it's possible they went out to collect it. That is definitely a good theory. My only issue is that these men were not greenhorns, but reportedly weathered seamen with many years' experience. They would know a day's wage simply isn't worth their life. In 1969, a student was killed in the stacks of the library at my old college, Penn State, and was found with a singular stab wound on her chest. It wasn't even laid or anything, and while there were many suspects, no one was ever arrested for it. It's insane how someone could kill a person in broad daylight at a major university and get away with it. It's not really anything super crazy, in comparison to other stories here. It's just weird to me personally because I would always study there and I didn't find out about it until after I graduated. The case of Adam immediately came to mind. Unidentified male child whose torso was discovered in the River Thames in London, United Kingdom, on the 21st of September 2001. Dubbed Adam by police officers, the unidentified remains belonged to a black male, around 4 to 8 years old, who had been wearing orange girls' shorts. The post-mortem showed that Adam had been poisoned, his throat had been slit to drain the blood from his body, and his head and limbs had been expertly removed. Investigators believe the child was likely from southwestern Nigeria, and that several days before his murder, he was trafficked to the United Kingdom for a moody ritual sacrifice. To date, nobody has been charged with Adam's murder, and his true identity remains unknown. https://en.wikipedia.org/wiki/adam_opening parenthesis murder_victim closing parenthesis rip little dude. Not necessarily the most creepy or disturbing thing I know of, but it was close to me. A friend I went to school with from 12th grade was driving home when a car pulled up next to his and the driver shot him in the head. Killed him instantly. This was about 7 years ago. No one has any idea why or who the shooter was. No one has ever said anything. He had no enemies, was universally liked, never hurt anyone. He was 20. Our community is not large. Someone knows something but has never come forward. Real shame. Had a bright future. Could it have been a random, initiation, gang-related crime? That was my first thought. Happened in my city like 6 years ago. Truck jumped the curb right in front of an elderly lady and someone got out of the passenger seat and shot her in the chest with a shotgun. The police caught them and it turned out to be gang initiation. Go kill a random person and you're in. Lady was just going for a walk. The Las Vegas mass shooting is the worst such event in our nation's history, and law enforcement basically told us nothing. Yes. Also, maybe I've just missed it, but it's almost like the vast majority have somehow just forgotten about it. I don't think I've seen anyone speak about it since the first anniversary. Precisely because there's no narrative attached to it. Humans remember stuff more readily if there's story and detail built into it. The Vegas shooter did everything he could to conceal his motive and his life was unremarkable. There also wasn't much political discourse in the aftermath since the device he used to make his gun, full auto, is pretty easy to make yourself and isn't really illegal anyway. It's weird how some things live in the human consciousness while seemingly objectively worse events disappear, but I think it has everything to do with how compelling the story behind the event is, and the Vegas shooting was strangely bland outside of the massive death toll. You summed it up perfectly. The Vegas shooter hit a really high number of killed, which should make it a horrific story, top of mind when it comes to mass shootings, but there was no story for our human brains to latch onto but a massive number, which our brains just don't grasp. There's no conspiracy, just no story. I will add one interesting detail though. Later reports stated that he put a second set of high-powered rifles in a connected hotel room. The door to that room was locked with the key locked in there too. His plan, it seems, was to lure cops into the room he was shooting the concert from and ambush them from the second room using his second arsenal. But for some reason the door closed and he didn't have the key. Realizing he couldn't get to his other guns and the cops were coming, he had wounded a security guard on the hall, so he knew they were on their way. He killed himself instead. Imagine how things changed, just because someone accidentally locked their keys inside their hotel room. Jack the Ripper. There's a few victims compared to others' cases, however the way it was done is horrible. It's a mystery unsolved since 1888 and that will never be. When you know that during that times, London smelled, was hidden by a thick fog, everything was dirty and the people all struggled despite the industrial boom. Imagine when you are from the lower class ever, knowing a serial killer is outside and you literally have nothing to protect you. The policemen were useless. It happened quick, and the killer disappeared. It put London in terror. I got really into the case as a high schooler, like writing a 15-page report for a project, kind of into it. I actually feel pretty confident that we have the identity of the killer, that being Nathan Kaminsky. IDK about creepy, but disturbing, yeah. The Delphi murders of Abigail Williams and Liberty German. 2 teenage girls hiking on a trail in Delphi, Indiana. Walking across a bridge, one of them spots a creepy guy following them on the bridge and even films it. There's audio recording of suspected bridge guy ordering them to go down the hill. They were murdered and found not far from the bridge they were on. That was years ago, and the murder is nowhere closer to being solved. Even with video of the suspect, the bridge guy. There's been new developments in the last year or two where people thought it might be some guy, but he got ruled out. Now it's a father-son suspect situation right now, and people seem to be holding out hope it's them. I personally don't think it is. But in any case, it's been years now, doesn't look to be solved anytime soon. Very sad situation. Mine. But it will not resonate to anyone else because it is very pertinent to my own life. For 36 years I have been wondering exactly how my dad died in the car crash. Did he die on impact? What really happened to the nurse who drove her van into him as he sat seat buckled in the passenger seat? I never saw him after, so was he cremated due to extensive physical damage? Did he ever even have an obituary? Where were he and his friends young to at the time? These questions and more have been on my mind since age 5. I still have dreams where I see my daddy and try to tell him not to go out tonight. He would be in an accident, but in these dreams I can never reach him, and he never turns around to face me. The dreams are strange. The same thing happens with husband, suicide, and dear friend who died. Maybe in a car wreck. Maybe before. They ignore me. I'm sorry to read this. My condolences. Are you not able to ask your mother or other relatives about the cremation? And can you clarify on the question of what really happened to the nurse? Is there no one you can talk to or look up death certificate? I just want to hug you. I don't know why, but this one touched my heart. I wish I could magic an answer for you. Do you names for any of his friends or family from that time? Someone must have some more information. I wonder about the circumstances surrounding my brother-in-law's death. It appeared to be an accidental death at home, but there were a few things that my husband's family noticed that gave suspicion that he wasn't alone when it occurred. I can't get into too many details, but he died in a way that he would have never put himself at risk of. At least, it was well known that he had a phobia of the circumstances that caused his death. We just couldn't see him putting himself in that position. Also, certain things were out of place and our family noticed that a few little things were seemingly unaccounted for. What's more, he was dating a girl who worked for the local PD, and off-duty officers she worked with harassed him while they were out, not long before he died. He told his friends about it. The same PD were the ones that arrived on the scene when he was discovered, as he lived in their jurisdiction. They just washed their hands of it and didn't pursue it further, even though my in-laws pointed out some suspicious stuff. They brushed off the request for an autopsy and told my devastated mill that she'd have to pay out of pocket for private one conducted if she wanted one. Nobody could afford it at the time, so that was a no-go. Days after his funeral, somebody burglarized his home, and something very special to him was stolen. Nothing else, just this one thing, and it was somebody who knew where it was specifically. Not long after that, my sister-in-law received a strange, automated phone call from out of state, taunting her of her brother's death. A murder in Atlanta in 2020-2021. Katie and Bowie. Katie was walking Bowie, her pit bull, at dusk in Piedmont Park around 6 to 7 p.m. The area of the park had view from cameras, but thanks to Atlanta's mayor, a lot of them don't work. Only 3 in the park do. And unfortunately it wasn't any of the cameras near Katie or Bowie during the attack. The bodies were found completely mutilated, disturbingly mutilated. People in the area said that they heard her screaming, begging, basically being murdered, but nobody was able to see anything from their rings or windows. They only called police. Katie's eyelids were sliced off. She was gutted but going upwards, from her pelvic region all the way up to her top chest cavity. Bowie, her pit bull, fought like hell. He fought so hard, and was brutally killed by the killer as well. So many stab wounds, but Bowie was able to get some of the killer's DNA during a bite. I've never seen or heard the police ask the community for help like I did this one. The thing is, there's a large homeless population in that area. Nobody ever reported or put online that they witnessed someone who was bitten or mauled by a pit bull. So where did the killer get treatment? There's theories on who it was, but Atlanta is so giant and packed with people that this case may very well never be solved. One theory is that this was the beginning of or peak of a serial killer. Another theory is that there were 2 attackers. A third theory is that it was a homeless person, nomad. And a final theory is someone who they might have known. The thing about Atlanta is that everyone goes to the park they were murdered in, and the area of the park was partially but not completely isolated. Her fiancé hadn't heard from Katie, so they went looking for her on their normal walking route and discovered their brutally murdered bodies. Please, if anyone knows anything, please help Katie and Bowie find justice. Any tips can be given anonymously through Atlanta Crime Stoppers. I scrolled way too long to find your comment, but I was dedicated because I think about this case all the time. Katie actually left to walk Bowie at midnight and her partner found them an hour later. The fact that someone was able to brutally murder her in such a public place so quickly really disturbs me. I've been to Piedmont Park thousands of times and only walked through it once at night, never again. I really hope we see this case solved one day and Katie and Bowie get the justice they deserve. I think about it at least every 2 months. It's still so shocking even after a year later. That case, I think, will haunt the people of Atlanta for a while. Was it even more brutal than I described? It's sickening, and I don't remember hearing any updates on if the city is making all the cams work. The only additional detail I know of is that the killer carved the letter F, A, and T on her torso. Absolutely awful. I did read that they've installed more cameras in the park this year, especially in the area where the murder occurred, which makes sense with it being so close to the 10th Street entrance. They've also installed a permanent memorial for her, a park bench, I think. Edit. I looked it up and the bench is actually in the spot where she died. The funds were raised by her family and friends. I don't think I would be able to sit on that bench knowing that's the exact spot. I actually live in a city a little less than 30 minutes away from Atlanta, and her death swept through Atlanta and every surrounding city like hell. Most of us speculated that it was a brutal serial killer, but that was because of a post circulating, I'll try to find it, that claimed her death was one of 3 who had died in similar ways. I believe that was later confirmed false, but it really stuck with me for the entire week. Living in this part of Georgia gets you used to gunshots during the night and shit like that, and sometimes the occasional murder during a dispute, but the idea of a killer that brutal roaming around really made my already present paranoia worse. If you are hearing this, please subscribe. I'll help you out with new videos.